It is kickoff time in the nation that puts the beautiful in the beautiful game. Sao Paulo, Brazil, hosting the opening match of the 2014 Football World Cup. It's not all been samba football in the run-up to the tournament, and the suspense has long graduated from the sports pages. There's been, a transit strike these past few days in Sao Paulo. That's on hold, but there was an airport workers' strike in Rio today. Workmen still rushing to complete jobs on untested venues. The country's president taking to television to reassure constituents and the rest of the planet, shocked last year to discover protests in football-mad Brazil against the World Cup, hardly imaginable when Dilma Rousseff's predecessor, Lula, celebrated in the arms of Pelé the awarding of the world's biggest sporting event. In a nation that's seen 40 million citizens lifted out of poverty in a decade, some see this all merely as the growing pains of success. For others, Brazil bit off more than it could chew. And with many of the stadiums already deemed white elephants, some predict this will be the last major sporting event that will be seen in places like Brazil. The heat's not only on the local organizers, but on the world governing body, FIFA, which insists it's non-profit but will pocket plenty of cash after this World Cup. And with a fresh bribery scandal on its hands over the awarding of the 2022 tournament to oil-rich Qatar, will FIFA once again be able to shrug off the scrutiny? What is the future of major sporting events such as this one? Today in the France 24 debate, the question is, Fiesta or Fiasco? With us to talk about it from the Brazilian service of sister station Radio France International, Cintia CARDOSO. Welcome back to the France 24 debate. Welcome to Brazilian student and activist Rodrigo De Rezende. Thank you for being with us here.
Thank you for having me.
Marc BURLEIGH of the French news agency AFP, who was posted in Brazil from
2007 to the end of 2011.
All right, thanks for being with us. And joining us from Bristol, David GOLDBLATT, author of Football Nation, a footballing history of Brazil. Welcome to the show. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Now, the latest news, Cintia Cardoso, is that the fans are heading to the stadium for the match, but that there was tear gas earlier in Sao Paulo. Only several hundred protesters, at least 5 injured though, grenades, stun grenades, tear gas used. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I saw some of the images. I had the impression that really was not very many protesters, but I just think it's an overwhelming event for the police, and I do believe that maybe they overreacted. And it's also because a lot of stress. They really have to perform an excellent job tonight, and then nothing can go wrong. So my thoughts, of course, it's kind of bittersweet. I had only a few hours before the kickoff, but I do believe it was unfortunate, and perhaps going to be a lesson for the police to handle how they have to handle the next protest that they will come over the next days during the whole month of the World Cup in Brazil.
And we've seen protests on a daily basis, since last June, and oftentimes protests for various things, not simply about the World Cup, obviously. What do you think? Now that it's the day of the opening kickoff, are you happy or unhappy that Brazil is hosting the tournament?
Well, that's a very difficult question. Of course, it's a great opportunity for the country to have such a spotlight shown onto it. And as we have been seeing, of course, it can show the underbelly of this rising giant, as we say. And of course, there can be some opportunistic demands, but what we have seen today in Sao Paulo, for instance, is a very vicious police deployment, which is quite characteristic of police in that state. And it's a good thing that we have had so much protest lately, but it would be it's hard in the state of Sao Paulo not to acknowledge the legacy that the police has from the times of the dictatorship, and we hope that.
But that was more than 2 decades ago.
Yes, but the structures are still the same. There are a number of reports on police reform in Brazil, in particular the fact that it's still militarized, and it's a very opaque functioning. And we have seen since last year how truculent, how violent they can be in repressing completely peaceful demonstrators. Even the press got hit many times.
Rodrigo, you're from Sao Paulo. Tell us, are you proud that your city is hosting the opening match of the World Cup, or do you have mixed feelings?
Well, it's a great honor for every Brazilian, and we say that football is a religion in Brazil, and that's also true for a number of countries. But yes, of course, we're happy about it. But we cannot be happy about how FIFA has forced the hand of the government, or even how the government has let itself has its hands forced, and passed atrocious laws that go against even the Brazilian constitution at times. And it's a completely ambiguous feeling that we have right now, and that's what you can see in Brazil. We want to wave the flag for our national team, but we do not want to condone what has been done in the name of that event.
Marc BURLEIGH, our France 24's Anelise Borges, who will cross over to perhaps, who's there in Sao Paulo, was telling us there's a huge difference in the pre-tournament atmosphere in Rio and Sao Paulo. Why is that?
Well, first of all, what strikes me is that it was very late to get going, all of this. Apart from that, Rio is very much the party town. It's got it's the sort of focus of Carnival. I mean, Sao Paulo has its own Carnival, but I think you'll agree it's not nearly as spectacular as the Rio one. When it comes to the partying, Rio will always be the ones that will put it on better. But that said, Sao Paulo, the time that I was there, I really remember the sense of community for the really huge national football games, the times where, it's a city of, 25 million people pretty much overall, horrendous traffic most of the time. And then when the football starts, it's just like it's Zombieland. You've got empty avenues everywhere. Everybody's preferably in a cafe, because you want that communal buzz and a few beers as well while you watch the game, or they're at home watching it on TV. It's a fantastic feeling when it is actually underway. But I'll have to stress the ambivalence that a lot of my Brazilian friends are expressing as well about the way it's being executed.
David Goldblatt, is that ambivalence overblown? Is this just pre-tournament chatter?
Reason to be incredibly angry about the way in which the World Cup is organised. There's every reason to be angry about the way in which the Brazilian police conduct themselves, and they've proved themselves true to form today in Sao Paulo. And if I can just say, I'm not just convinced that Rio will be the party town. Actually, some of the biggest demonstrations in 2013 happened in Rio. The largest demonstration of 600,000 occurred in Rio. And of course, we still have the Rio 2016 Olympics to come. And Rio has been feeling the pressure and the negative consequences of development more sharply than any other city. And I expect once this thing kicks off, we will see protest in Rio too.
All right. Cintia Cardoso, as a Rio native, do you agree?
Well, I think, of course, for the next years until 2016, when we have the World Cup, will be a lot of pressure in Rio. And, of course, the pressure is mounting because the criticism is mounting as well. As we see, most of the infrastructure for the Olympics in Rio are not really even started yet to be built. So, of course, we're going to be... But if
that's in 2 years.
In 2 years, yes. So a lot, they're really behind schedule. But regarding the feeling, the party, the Fiesta in Rio, I think the enthusiasm, even for this World Cup, is going to be the 11th hour enthusiasm. I have some of my friends telling me that yesterday people started painting the streets in Rio and in Sao Paulo. So now that you really have a few hours before the event, now it's kicking off also the enthusiasm in Rio and in Sao Paulo as well.
All right. Anelise Borges from France 24 joins us now from Sao Paulo. Anelise, you've seen... we'll try to go over to Anelise as quick as we can. We're just sorting out a few technical issues. Reaction coming in, one on Facebook from Amel saying, I think Brazil should spend their money on education. So there's an initial reaction. By the way, on Tuesday, the country's president took to the airwaves, Dilma Rousseff, telling protesters she's heeded their calls, she's heard what they have to say, but please let the games begin.
There are people who claim the resources for the Cup should have been directed to healthcare and education. I hear and respect those opinions, but I don't agree with them. It's a false dilemma.
Is it a false dilemma, Rodrigo De Rezende?
Well, I think one of the things we have to remember is that last year's protests, which were a lot more important, that took a lot more people to the streets, really almost ended after a pronouncement of the president alongside all governors from all the states of Brazil, in which she put forward 5 points and promised a lot of investment in transportation, in health, in education, and also in a political reform. And everyone rallied behind her at that time, but it has not happened. And we are in an election year in Brazil. And all these anger, which nowadays, it's true, people are taken to the streets and they criticize FIFA and they say we want FIFA standard schools and we want FIFA standard hospitals. Well, some change will have to come, and Brazilians to a large extent know that that change will have to come through the urns, through the ballot box.
Let me go to Sao Paulo. We can now cross over to Anelise Borges. And Anelise, it sounds like you've seen two different Sao Paulos today.
Absolutely, Francois. There were protesters set to take place 11 kilometers from the Arena de Sao Paulo, from where we are now. 3,000 people were expected on those protests. Just 100 people showed up, and there were so many police officers in that area that used stun grenades and tear gas against those demonstrations, and they dispersed them immediately. So that was just 11 kilometers from here, and
all right, we seem to have lost the connection. Apologies for that. We'll try to sort that out. David Goldblatt, let me ask you, when you started work on your book, did you think that on the opening day of the World Cup here we'd be debating whether or not it was a good idea for Brazil to be hosting the tournament?
Well, to be honest, I probably did, because the moment that it came to me to write the book was standing in the main square of Belo Horizonte on the day of the semi-final in the Confederations Cup last year. And in the centre of that square, there's a huge obelisk 30 metres high. And normally that's the place where the victories of the Brazilian national team would be celebrated. But that on that evening, after beating Uruguay, it was filled with a fusillade of tear gas so large that it completely obscured the obelisk. And I thought, I simply must investigate and work out what the history of this is. And to be honest, having seen the Brazilian police in action and Brazilian politics in action, I was pretty sure that we would get to this day and we would be facing a very uncertain World Cup.
And you heard the complaint there of Rodrigo saying there was promises made by politicians that they would see the benefits of the World Cup, and those promises, of course, have not been fulfilled yet. Do you think there's going to be a backlash, or do you think that, well, if Brazil does well on the pitch, this will all blow over?
Well, it might blow over for some. I think that the events of the last year have changed a lot of Brazilians' attitude to football. People have become too smart, too educated and too cynical to think that any amount of victory on the football pitch is an adequate substitute for a functioning public health system. And they're right.
Do you agree with that, Cintia Cardoso?
Yeah, of course, when you say people got smarter, I mean, of course, this is not going to erase the passion for football, but people start to realize that there will be room for football, there will be room for party, but there will also be room for protests and to claim for better investments in education and transport and so on. But a lot of people also consider that it's not because Brazil is hosting the World Cup that everything is going bad. You know, people start to realize that it's not because Brazil is hosting the World Cup that they not have hospitals. So there's something that's also growing up as well.
Marc BURLEIGH, the point's been made that millions of tourists flock to Brazil every year. They go for Carnival, for instance. They brave all the insecurity and the threats of crime and all of this, and we don't make it headline news then.
Well, the amount of media attention coming down on this. I think what's been raised here is really interesting. The whole political thing, the way, I mean, with the way the economy developed, particularly during the Lula years, the way Brazil advanced, and this is supposed to be a showcase of how much it advanced. The Brazilians don't want to be fooled anymore. They're showing that they can appreciate sport for what it is, but it's not a substitute for having the infrastructure that they've been promised, not just now. They've been promised this for like 10, 15 years. They had a boom period And that money just didn't go to where it should have. And now the economy is pretty much sliding down. They realize that prices are sky high there. For Europeans going to Brazil will be shocked by the prices. And that's saying something for a Latin American country. It's a very tough situation for a lot of people. We talk about a growing middle class in Brazil. That middle class isn't what we would consider middle class, but the prices that this middle class, who are earning, what is it, $1,200 a month or something, $1,200 a month, something like that, and you're paying for $20 hamburgers, you transport, everything are our prices, and they've got a fairly moderate wage to go with it. There's a lot of anger that what's been promised for so long, and not just now, hasn't come forward.
Is there a chance that those 40 million who've been lifted out of poverty could slide back into it, or at least feel the heavy burden of debt?
Yeah, actually, there's a risk, because actually many studies show that actually they are in a very precarious situation. Of course, they are so-called middle class in Brazil, but as for European standards, they are not middle class at all. And of course, with the rise of inflation, all the benefits that they have might be eroded. They're not going perhaps to walk back 10, 15 years, but of course they're not going to advance as fast. And that's what they were expecting when they became a middle class. They have very high expectations. And of course, when Brazil was chosen 7 years ago, Brazil was really in the booming moment, and now we're coming in slowing down. And this reflects also on the population and all the expectations. So there's a lot of frustration.
David Goldblatt, when you go back in history, football has been instrumentalized politically. We think most notably of the 1970 World Cup, when Brazil wins and the junta makes hay out of that. This time around, there'll be no mileage for Dilma Rousseff if Brazil wins?
I think, if Brazil win and nobody dies during this World Cup on the end of a rubber bullet, then there's bound to be some positive vibes around that, and there will be some votes in it. But I don't think it will be a landslide, and I don't think it will change the fundamentals of Brazilian politics. And, I think that's a good thing. That's an advance for Brazil.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back with part 2 of our discussion, we're going to look at what will be left behind once the tournament ends and address the point you were making about FIFA. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.